what ends up happening is that the nice guy is nice because he has fear that if he is his authentic self, he's going to be rejected or he's not going to be loved. So what ends up happening is that oftentimes as nice guys, there's actually like manipulation that's occurring underneath, and in that, then there's actually an inauthenticity in.
So what's the antidote? Hey, and welcome back to Family Man Entrepreneurs. I am here with Coach Andrew Mundy. He is the creator of the No More Mr. Nice Guy community group and is an amazing coach. He has a coaching program called Zero Limits Coaching, and you can find him on andrewmundy.com. So I'm very lucky to have him here, and let's hear from him himself. Welcome, Andrew. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Mark. Thanks so much for having me here. And I'm very excited for our conversation today.
Brilliant. So let me start with the first question. Can you tell me a bit about your background and why this focus on Mr. Nice Guys, and what did Mr. Nice Guys do to you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it really, how much time do you have, in that sense? But yeah, I mean, I've had quite a journey. When I left university, I actually worked for the prison system here in Canada. So I worked as an officer in the prison for about 8 years. And, sort of the side piece to that was that I've always been interested in personal development and sort of really understanding life at a deeper level. Like my background is in psychology, so went from psychology into sort of the shadow side of the world and working in the prison system. But then there was eventually a point where I transitioned into corporate. And, there was a little bit of rockiness in that transition. Went into sales and marketing for about 5 years. And in that time, discovered coaching. And when I stepped into the world of coaching, it's sort of this natural synchronicity with personal development. And then obviously, No More Mr. Nice Guy is a part of the work that I do. And really the reason for that is because, let's say I had been a nice guy, in my life, a lot of people would comment about like, oh, you're such a nice guy, and on the surface level, it feels good. But as you start to sort of unpack that, you're like, hey, wait a second, like, what does this really mean? It sort of opens up a whole, trajectory of like, hey, there's some discovery here. So No More Mr. Nice Guy is actually a book written by Robert Glover, and I'm one of the certified coaches of his program and have sort of, helped support the growth of that movement. And so, when you ask that question about like, why No More Mr. Nice Guy? Well, a big part of it is because I've been that guy, still have some of those qualities and characteristics. And it's a real opportunity to really support men who feel like, hey, they've got so much potential or they're such good people. And yet in a world where sometimes being nice, being good doesn't actually create what we want, I got to be careful with how there's probably more to speak to in that. Really, it's supporting the man to be his authentic self. And so that's really why I do it, because it's such amazing work to be able to do that with men.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So just to dig a bit more into it, what are the negative parts of being Mr. Nice Guy, like a nice guy or just a nice guy? I presume the detail is in being just a nice guy instead of also a nice guy. But you can explain that better than.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and this is the sort of we'll call it the continuum, right? Because again, always actually really I think there's sort of a negative connotation to it now, right? Oh, like I'm a nice guy. And the first place really connecting to, there are good things about being a nice, genuine person. A lot of people have wonderful lives from being that. And so it's never stepping over that. But when you start to dive into like, well, what are some of the shadow signs of being a nice guy? What's so like the fundamental tenet of it would potentially be like, nice guy likely didn't get his needs met in childhood. Or maybe there was isolation, maybe, and before I get all wordy about it, really just that, right? They didn't get their needs met. They didn't feel validated. They didn't feel important. And so from that, they had to develop survival skills. They had to develop ways that they could cope with that. And so when we look at that as we go into, say, teenage years or even adulthood, what ends up happening is that the nice guy is nice because he has fear that if he is his authentic self, he's going to be rejected or he's not going to be loved. So what ends up happening is that oftentimes as nice guys, there's actually like manipulation that's occurring underneath. You know, and in that, then there's actually an inauthenticity in it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. You can see that in a lot of places. So what's the antidote? How can we remedy that?
There's a few ways. You know, there's definitely some tactical approaches we'll call to it, and then there's also some deep sort of inner work that can be there. You know, and I think that if we start from the foundation is as a man allowing ourselves to be with, I am an important person. It can have needs. Because if you look at a lot of men out in the world today, there's a high expectation of men, especially as fathers and providers. And oftentimes what I see is that they're so low on sort of like the, they're so low in sort of the family dynamic that they're not even aware of the needs that they have. And so that's really the first place of looking at is like, hey, can you be with the fact that you have needs? You're a human being that is important and can have, just that. So that's sort of the first place that we look at is that expression of needs.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. What is the main complaint from the Mr. Nice Guys themselves? Because obviously you have this community group on Facebook, and I would recommend everyone to visit if they feel called to, and join, of course. So from the Mr. Nice Guys themselves, what is the biggest frustration or the few biggest frustrations that you hear for them, where you go like, yeah, that's just very common. Like is it that the restraint of being authentic, that they feel they can't be themselves, and what have you heard?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I do think at sort of the highest level of it, it is going to be their relationships, whether it's an intimate relationship or even just relationships that they have with others. Again, they don't feel like they can be themselves. And so, from that, there's going to be a disconnect. There's likely going to be a disconnect with their intimate partners. They probably have inauthentic relationships with family members. And then a lot of nice guys, they don't have a lot of friends either. So then from that, it's a life of isolation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So it's really on working on becoming a bit more like assertive, a bit more confident. Am I right saying that? Just to become a bit more confident and assertive?
Sure. And I would say trusting as well.
Trusting. Okay.
Trusting, right? Because again, there's a lot of talk about sort of the lone wolf. If a lot of nice guys have that sort of lone wolf mentality, they're very mistrusting of others around them, right? And so that is one of the real opportunities is like, hey, can you get involved in a men's group? Can you, start to sort of expand on your circle in that way and just start to sort of build those communities.
Yeah. I love that. So what are some of the biggest limiting beliefs you've seen around Mr. Nice Guy? So once they start and actually are in the program, what are some of the things that they go like, I can't do this because I'm blah, 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 or I was raised blah, blah, blah. So what I say blah,
Great
blah,
question.
blah, not in a disparaging way, but just because very often they look back and say, actually, right, this is the story I told myself because I was put in that dynamic. So go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones that I see is in intimate relationship where a lot of these guys, they really struggle to voice their needs. They really struggle to stand for what they want in their relationship because there's fear there. There's again, even potentially they've had a relationship. Maybe it was, their father was abusive or he yelled a lot, or, when we look at the other side of it, maybe mom, you know, um, had heightened emotions, or she sort of latched on to the boy when he was younger. And so those same dynamics we start to see in the relationship with their intimate partner, where, their intimate partner has heightened emotions or they get angry. That is a real place that a lot of guys, they start kind of like they rub up against that. It almost feels like they're hitting a wall. There's a lot of fear there. And so, but if that man can sort of step into the fire, so to speak, and practice groundedness and just sort of their breath in those moments, it's a huge victory. It's a huge victory to be able to bring that into their relationship. So that's definitely one of the bigger ones that I see, one of the more common, threads in the work that I do.
Okay, so you also work a lot with, let's say, the body itself instead of just the speaking part, let's say, the intellectual part.
So the piece that I was speaking to is actually like the relationship, the communication side of things. But yes, definitely, absolutely. Like I've started to actually dive more into what would be called like a trauma-informed approach, because a great example is if we speak to the same dynamic. You have a man that's fearful of addressing conflict with his wife. A lot of people out in the world will just be like, well, go do it. Right? You just need the confidence to go do it. And if we really dive deeper, well, there's fear there. There's anxiety there. And so that's where we start to look at, how are we breathing? How can we ground ourselves and be patient in those moments? So definitely there is, sort of a physical aspect to this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I was wondering, because you see so many videos about, you go to social media, everything is about, for men, everything is about discipline and, becoming a disciplined man and being very regulated, which, discipline is freedom in many ways. And emotional regulation is at the base of what we need to have if you want to self-regulate your life and choose your path, you don't want to be at the slave of your emotions. But how do you get to the discipline? Because very often you get told you have to be disciplined, you have to do that. How do you go from being in that situation where you are stuck in the merry-go-round of being Mr. Nice Guy, and the same dynamics with your partner, to actually moving into a life where it's at least a bit more disciplined and getting out of or stepping off of that merry-go-round?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the place that I will generally start with people is really creating with the future in mind. So for example, if you see an opportunity for growth in your relationship, starting to get clear on like what is it that you're actually wanting to create in your relationship, and who do you want to be in that? When we can then have sort of that sort of, again, it's not the end goal, but at least a place that we can move towards, then what we want to start to look at is, well, where is the gap? Where is the gap between where you are now and where you want to be in the future in your relationship? And that's the place where then we can start to look at some of those structures. So obviously with say a relationship, some of the first places I just look at is, well, what isn't being addressed? There's something that you want. What's not being addressed in the relationship, or what are some of the common complaints? And so from there, you can start to kind of put those structures in place of, is there a conversation that needs to be had? Or, is it every time that you feel like you've been mistreated by your partner, you bring it up, starting to kind of create structures in that way. I'll leave it there, just to see if there's anything else that you want to speak to.
No, that's absolutely clear. Thank you. And that really makes sense. It's just little by little and baby steps in the way that I understood it from you. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't want to discount, like, the place that I see a lot of people struggle with is that they'll be like, hey, I want my marriage to change, but they don't have any idea of what they just stick with I want my marriage to change. I want my marriage to be different, but they have no idea of what that could actually look like. So
Mm-hmm.
then, as you speak about, they stay on that merry-go-round because they
Mm-hmm.
have no direction.
Yeah.
And so that's that beautiful piece of like when we can actually envision where we want to go, then we can move towards that.
Yeah. It's curious how often we hear it, but how well we do hear it at school as well. For example, university or wherever at work, you have to set goals, and you have a goal, and you work towards that goal. But then we do it so often at work, somewhere else.
Yes.
When you any corporate job or any as an entrepreneur, you have a goal. You want to make so many sales. You want to create that program, or you want to sell this product or that product, or work with, or collaborate with that business. You have a goal. It's very clear. But then in your own personal life, people really seem to struggle with saying, no, what do I want my life to look like? What do I want,
Yes.
my evenings to look like when I come home from work? Or how do I want my days to look like if I work from home? How do I want to integrate that with my kids? Right? It seems to be, I think it's probably from school that we've been told, you have to do that, and we compartmentalize that. It's something else we do outside of our home, but in our home we just do things the way our parents did it. That's it. So thank you very much for commenting on that. So my other question on that in general, so outside of the Mr. Nice Guy condition that a lot of men are dealing with, what are some, because you said you work a lot with men, what are some other issues, or let's say obstacles that you see men run into this time? Or what do men come to you for, where you see like, this is just I see a pattern here across multiple clients?
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a few places that I could speak to. I think one that there's sort of two that I'll speak to. One is that a lot of the clients that I coach, they are very successful individuals. They've had, strategies that they utilized, probably again created from childhood to create a certain level of success in their life. So on paper, these individuals are very successful, but they kind of get to this place where they're like, is that it? Like I did what I needed to do to create the success, and I'm still not happy. And so that's a big place of where I support people is both, okay, what is it that you really want then? Like what would actually be the fulfilling life for you? And a lot of that means that then we have to take all those strategies that have supported them to this point of their life and evolve them, in that sense. Kind of, dynamic. But the piece that I wanted to speak to there is that, so what I do often find is that people come to me and they have sort of one way of thinking. They're very black and white in their thinking, like life is this way or life is not this way. And so one of the things that really opens up in our work together is, can you be multidimensional? Can you see the world from different viewpoints or different opportunities? Can there be different ways that we solve these things? Because then the beauty of that is that this individual becomes creative. Maybe this didn't work in my relationship, so I can try from this angle. Or maybe in my business, I tried this and it didn't work. What's a different way that I can come at this? And that has been really powerful to see, because when people can start to think in this sort of multi-dimensional or flexible way, the whole world opens up for them.
Oh, yes. And they always say, your dreams, whatever your dreams are, they're too small. Like, you need to dream bigger, whatever your dreams are. And part of that is, of course, looking at it in different ways. And you mentioned learning from your experiences and learning from, for example, what worked and what didn't work. Do you feel that is something men in general struggle a bit with? Or kind of, you said there's a bit of a repetition drive to keep doing the same thing.
Yeah.
How can you get out of that?
So it's a great question, because I would say it's a human dynamic. not even just men, but from a
Yeah.
human dynamic. So this is the dance, because what you're speaking to is like, yes, if we look at it from the perspective of, hey, I tried something in the past and it didn't work, and so yeah, there has to be an adjustment there. But what generally happens with people is that they're actually creating the future from the past. And so one of the ways that we, in these conversations is, can we actually create the future from the future? So that's going to require us to be able to have a clean slate. So like, as we look at, say, our relationship, the tendency for a human being is to go from past experience and be like, well, this didn't work, and this didn't work, and this didn't work, so none of it works. But really just actually centering ourselves and allowing ourselves to be like, listen, I'm actually going to put the past aside as much as I can and just be very centered in this moment. From here, what is possible for me to create in this relationship?
Yeah.
It's a totally, so yeah, coming back to it, I would say it's very much a universal dynamic where people get bogged down by the patterns, the resentments, the heaviness that they've held from the past. And so that's then the real opportunity of releasing some of that so that we can be more clear, more flexible as we look to create the future.
Oh, yeah. I love what you said there, and focusing on the now. That's just, this realization that you live now, like you don't live, like there is no past. It's
Yes.
past. And technically there is no one future. You have literally all the options in front of you.
Yeah.
That literally just now. If tomorrow, or let's say after you finish this, you decide to become an airplane pilot, you can sign up and
Yes.
work your way towards that. So there's literally, you can go any way you any way you want to, right? And
Yes.
that's wonderful. I wish there was, there's so many coaches out there and not enough, I want to say. That's not anything to say. I think there's 8 billion people in the world,
Yes.
and we've seen what the state of the world is like. And if everybody did the work, what you helped them to do, the world would be a very, very different place. So
Yeah.
there is
Thank you.
a lot more space for a lot of people, and a lot of coaching. And I just love what you contribute to that world. And, that kind of leads me to my next question. What you do, I don't know if you ever think about that, but how you influence your clients, men and women, has such an impact on kids as well, and how they are raised and how they see their parents. And, the kids take that into their adulthood, and then that has an influence on how, firstly, on the partner they choose. They probably would choose healthier partners because they've done a lot of the work they had to do. So they'll choose healthy partners. They have a healthy dynamic. Maybe there's less divorce. The kids are probably they accepting that healthy behavior as normal. And what you do has an effect, let's say, hundreds of years down the line, right? That's just really nice to know, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And have you, with your clients, have you already seen the impact it has had on the family unit, with the kids or even with their parents?
Absolutely. I think sort of the most obvious place is in the relationships, right? In the relationships with their intimate partner. How by them, stepping into that, sort of that authentic self, the impact they can have. Sometimes it might end up being a dissolution of the relationship too, right? Sometimes from one person stepping into that work, the relationship ends, right? That's a possibility of it. But when you talk about sort of the family unit, absolutely, right? There's massive benefits in having authentic partnership between, the couple themselves. And then when you start to look at, there's ripples everywhere in their parenting, in their relationships with their own, how they're leading in work. The opportunities are endless.
Yeah, it's wonderful to think of all the positivity in the world that could come from one session, for example, one coaching session or a couple of coaching sessions where people have a breakthrough, and I think, wow, this is really well, I'm going to change my way of looking at things, and the energy that spreads throughout the world is amazing.
Yes.
And I saw on your website that spirituality is also a big part of your coaching practice. Can you speak a bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So I've had, I guess, a lot of fortune over the years through the coach training that I've done. And then I specifically did a program. Well, I'll back it up a bit. In one of the first coach training programs that I did, there was a unit on spirit and really bringing spirit into the coaching space. It's from a non-denominational perspective, right? So, it's not, hey, I'm focused specifically on Christianity. It's really that can we as human beings, I could be Christian, you could be Buddhist, and if we can actually take the labels of the religion and put them aside and actually be connected to the high level of spirit, what then can be created? And so from that first coaching program, we'll say, went into a program with a mentor of mine named Leon Vanderpool, who runs a coaching program called the Deep Coaching Intensive. And this is very much a focus on spirit and universality being in our lives. And the more that we can be connected to whatever that means to us, what then is the life that can be created from that place? And so, I'll just add in, the way that I bring this into my coaching is very easeful. The beauty of it is like, so I can speak to it right now. I have a client right now who's like, I'm very nervous about spirituality. So with him, it's like in the space, there is spirit, but I'm not necessarily, bringing that into the conversation. Whereas I've had other clients where they are very much connected to spirit and it becomes a part of the conversation. And so we go down that path together. But that's the beauty of it, is that it's like it's partnership with the client in partnership with spirit.
Yeah. I love that. So in the clients that do feel a bit more connected, how have you seen the connection with spirit helps them, or at least the sessions?
Yes. I mean, I have to kind of think of a few examples. I mean, it's just there's such a power and a trust when we can actually connect to spirit in our lives, and again, like this is still a journey that I'm on, but when we can actually, for a moment or even 10 minutes or 20 minutes, and that's sort of the beauty of the coaching space, is that like life gets to slow down. We get to be focused on, our lives specifically. When we can connect to, the universality of the world in a space like that, it starts to then have residuals in other areas of life. Like, oh, maybe we're out on a walk one day and we get to spend a few minutes just, instead of focused on, what our next business move is, hey, what do I feel guided by? Or what do I feel called to do next? It just becomes it's a different way of living, because we can be that businessman, we can be that disciplined individual, but yet we can be that spiritual individual as well. We can be that person that's connected to, humanity, connected to the universe. And to me, that is a holistic individual.
Yeah. And it makes such a difference just knowing that whatever you do has an effect on everyone, because you're all connected.
Yes.
You're in a way reflections of each other. Like everyone is a reflection of you.
Yes.
And very often, you can see that with a lot of people, that they will get sent people in their life specifically to trigger them, to recognize that trigger, to work on that particular issue. And the universe will keep sending people to keep triggering you.
Yes.
until you resolve, until you learn, which is always, well, not always, but usually it tends to be some kind of variation of more love for themselves and accepting themselves, in my experience anyway.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about kids, because you have so much experience with work with people. If there's something you would change in how kids are raised nowadays? Just what you could see in your environment. Of course, that won't apply for everyone, but what you could see in your environment, what would you change in how kids are raised?
Such a great question. I mean, I think the one area that I would focus on is not putting so much pressure on kids in a performance aspect. So, you know, you see it in sports, at an early age, and then you see it in education as well. And I think that there's a dynamic that gets created where a lot of, I've had the opportunity to work with somebody who's 19, and sort of in that place of transitioning from the teenage years to adulthood, and the amount of pressure that they feel to have their life figured out at that point, it's so high. And, again, I obviously, and for me, I had that as well in some ways, really more because like I had to, at that point of life. But I just look at that, and it's like when I see from youth to the teenage years into adulthood, I mean, those early years of our 20s are so shaped by how we've been raised. And like there's such an opportunity for like a life of fulfillment and opportunity. And oftentimes I see it get kind of squashed in a way because you've got kids that are going to university and then they have to get a job after university and then they have a family. And then that's what ends up happening is they get to this point where they're in, their late 30s, their 40s. They're like, this is not what I wanted my life to be. So in my long way of speaking to it, I think just really taking the pressure off. You're going to have to gauge that a little bit, but really taking the pressure off and allowing kids and teenagers just to be who they are and allow them to find their path. Because by giving them that space and opportunity, I imagine it's going to be a much easier process for them as they get into their adulthood years.
Yeah, yeah, I would completely agree with that. There is a lot of pressure. To be honest, from my point of view, I remember so I grew up in Holland, the Netherlands, and it's, at 12 we had to do an exam to see to which school we had to go to, on which level we had to go and study. And at 14, you already had to kind of choose the subjects you would need for your university entrance. So very early on, you're already pushed to make this decision, and you kind of made to feel that you're stuck with that already. Like you've gone down that way, and you have to just continue that with either just I've put so much effort in there already, and going to continue with that. So how do you feel things have changed, let's say over the past 10 or 15 years when it comes to pressure on kids? Do you feel it's getting better, or is it getting worse?
I think there's more awareness around it now. I mean, you definitely see it even in sports where there's sort of a movement to as parents to just allow kids to play the sport. And you see enough stories of, let's say, professional athletes where they're like, yeah, I hate my father now because he put so much pressure on me to be a professional hockey player, and I made it to being a professional hockey player, but now we have a broken relationship.
Yeah.
And so I think it's great because we have more education and more awareness, I think, than in any generation before, in terms of like there's a real shadow side to that pressure. Do I think things have changed? Well, I think that's a part of the change. I can't speak for everybody, out in the world. I think there is a shifting dynamic. I think where it will really, where push sort of comes to shove will be as we look at these sort of next generations, the generation 10 years from now, do they feel like there's that same pressure, as they get into their teenage years or into their adult years, where it's like there's that high pressure to like go get a job, go get a house, go get a family. I think that'll sort of be the litmus test to see, where we're really going.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I completely agree with that. And talk about young people, how can we leverage social media in a way that it's beneficial for their environment? Because obviously they get bombarded with a lot of
Yes.
oh, stuff. To keep away some adjectives, how can we leverage social media in a way that it will improve their lives? So what can they do to leverage the social
Yeah.
media?
It's a tough one. I mean, I'm very fortunate because my kids are 7 and 5 still, so
Mhm.
we're not there yet in terms of like the cell phone and just all the platforms that are there for kids, I guess, say they're teenagers. I mean, I think that from what I've seen, there is a lot of good, right? I mean, you can go get your kid an iPad now, and there's some great educational games and resources there. I think it's a real tough one because I can go drive by the school that's down the road right now, and I often see kids on their cell phones, rather than just being in connection with each other. And
Mhm.
so I think the positives are in the educational resources and like just how much access we have to such amazing technology. So I think like that's where when we look at social media, if the social media platforms can put an emphasis on the educational side of things or the skill building side of things, I think that's a real win.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly. I agree. And it's really about, what they say about what you are, like the average of your closest 5 friends, or the 5 people you
Yeah,
hang around with most, right? And I think nowadays that's just replaced with social media, like maybe the
sure.
5 or 10 social media channels you watch most. So yeah, um, it's there definitely there are a lot of positive social media channels out there that
Yes.
can be leveraged in that way. So yeah, it might be hard for young kids to gain that discipline and to resist the dopamine hits. Is this
Yes.
something that, what do you think? How can this be implemented by parents, let's say?
I mean, you tell me. It's a great question. I think
Sure.
you're spot on because I mean, even for me, I have my own struggles around social media time or putting discipline in or that type of thing. So, asking, expecting our children to be
Hmm.
able to like figure this out on their own,
Hmm.
probably next to impossible.
Yeah.
You know, I wouldn't say I necessarily have the right answer around this, but I think there's a real good discussion around like can those resources be utilized for a time period and then using the things like, hey, there's a 1 hour time limit, right? Maybe you have
Mm,
1 hour time limit on your social media or your tablet or
yeah.
that type of thing, and really supporting the structures around that because again, as you really have to be disciplined. And so I think it's really just finding the ways to support your kids to be disciplined as well. So maybe that's having other activities, having other, places that they can be connected to as well. That's at least what I see at this point.
Mhm. Yeah. 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 No, that makes sense. I mean, if the parents are very strict with the amount of time they get to be on social media, and what they do on social media as well,
Yes.
keep an eye on that. And yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and one more piece that I'll speak to. I
Yeah.
think that there's some great technology out there now as well. Like again, I haven't had to use it, but I've heard that there's like Bark, for example, right? Where like
Uh-huh.
they've got software that, for teenagers, for example, that, it can kind of monitor the conversations that they're having online and it's like a secondary security
Hmm.
resource in that sense.
Yeah.
Again, I think, coming back to that discussion around the social media side of it, I think those are the real wins where we can have those measures in place.
Yeah. 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 No, it's definitely not an easy solution, that's for sure. It's kind of managing it and building the character of your children as well. But it speaks to so much. It gives you so much dopamine. If you, I mean, I'm the same in terms of
Yeah,
sometimes like mindless scrolling. I'm no different
totally.
from anyone else. So it's just a curious question to know how can we firstly stop ourselves and then the kids. So that's
Yeah.
thank you very much for your answer. I have one short little question,
Mhm.
just because I know you live in Canada. Canadians are famous for lots of stuff, but if you're
Are
in
we?
BC, the nature aspect is amazing. I lived there for a bit as well, and everybody was just into hiking, canoeing, kayaking, rock climbing. Like there's so much nature, and it's just stunning over there. Do you work with nature? Is this something that you could recommend people to come closer to, or how would you envision people's relationship with the nature around them, especially because you have so much over there and it's so beautiful over there in where we live?
Yeah. So at this point, I haven't done a ton of work with nature, at least in terms of like, say, am I going out on a walk and doing a coaching session outside, that type of thing. But definitely, absolutely, right? I mean, it's very well known now about the benefits of getting outside and being in nature, and it's always an opportunity to just explore, like, how can we bring in just a little bit more of that into our lives, whether we're getting outside and going for a walk or doing breath work. A very popular one now that you see is, I think folks call it grounding, where they just like put their feet into the soil, so it's finding these ways that we can be connected to nature more and more, given that we live in such a digital, world now. We're not the farmers of the past, or, outside as much as we used to be. And so, yeah, it definitely shows up in the work, and it's a place that I would love to continue to expand into, whether that's through retreats or just like more in-person work of utilizing the nature around us rather than being in like an office setting or that type of thing.
Yeah. No, I just thought of that because Canada obviously is very famous for it. So it's definitely something that people can use as part of their grounding in general, right? Especially if you're struggling with being overwhelmed and too many things happening at the same time, and this relationship isn't working, work is burning you down, and all of that. So brilliant. Thank you so much for your time.
Yes.
And what's the best way to connect with you if I was a client?
Yeah, so I think the easiest place, so I am on Facebook and LinkedIn under Andrew Mundy, so that's an easy place to connect with me there. If you're just looking to find out more about me, I've got a website as well, and that's under andrewmundy.com. That's another place that you can connect with me as well.
Perfect. I'll make sure to include them in the show notes. Okay, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed this conversation, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experience. And it's just, as I said, it's amazing how the work that you do can radiate out to people's families, and it's just so necessary, right? So thank you very much for not just men, but working with people to elevate their just making their lives better. It's such a good way to spend your life, put it that way.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much for your time.
For sure. Thank you.